again, and thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation with you yesterday prior to the meeting. And apologies that you didn't get the papers until yesterday. We'll see if we can do that a little bit better next time. So, folks, for all of you who are on the call, Zoom is a terrible way to run meetings, as I'm sure you all know. So I'll try and be as respectful as I can of the fact that we're all sitting here virtually and trying to look at screens and papers at the same time. One of the things that I'll try and do to make things a little easier is that when we get to each item, I'm going to move all of the resolutions myself, and then I'll call for a seconder. The other thing that I would ask you to do, and I understand that Mayor Allen has promoted this, is to use the hand feature, raise hand feature. And if that doesn't work, just wave madly in front of the screen. And if I pick you up, I'll do my best to pick you up, and if I don't, I apologise. I'll have some remarks when we're into the public excluded time in respect of the papers. What I would ask, because of the size of the papers today, I would ask of my colleagues is, with respect, if you wouldn't mind focusing on questions of real substance. If you've got any minor queries, by all means, you should ask them, but if you wouldn't mind maybe considering the possibility of asking them outside the meeting. We've just got a lot to get through. That is not in any way an attempt to stifle debate or discussion, and that is absolutely not my intention over the next 3 years. In fact, I want to do the exact opposite. And that's why I've adopted the twin themes of focus and brevity in terms of what I'm going to be trying to achieve over the next 3 years and continuing the journey that you've already started. For those of you who are presenting reports, could I just offer some guidance? At the end of the day, it's your report and you can make such remarks as you want. If I could simply say to you, please assume the report's been read. If you've got some new information to impart or something really important to say, by all means say it. But otherwise, if you don't, that's cool. We'll just go straight to questions. So, unless anyone else has anything to add, we'll get into it. Let's start with apologies. Do we have any apologies, Galen?
No, everyone is present.
So no apologies. No, that means there's no apologies for lateness. Does anyone? We're scheduled to finish around 12:30. I tend to be quite paranoid about not wasting people's time, so I'm going to do my absolute level best to land this plane by 12:30. Is there anyone that needs to duck away early? I know Mayor Allen's going to be in and out, and that's totally understandable. Is there anyone else that needs to duck away early? Okay, that's good. Thank you. So there's no need then, Galen, for any resolution in relation to apologies. Is that correct?
We should do an apology for early departure for you, Your Worship.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I have to, I'm in the office this morning, but I've got Zooms all day, so I need to leave to go back and try and get myself into my own office about 11 o'clock this morning. But I will have my camera off, as I am working with Terry in my office this morning as well.
Thanks,
so I'm trying to multitask.
No problem. It's very difficult for men, as you know. Galen, I'll move that resolution, and Mr. Deputy Mayor, are you happy to second that? Wonderful, thank you. It's carried. Yes, good. Turning now to the second item, which is confirmation of the status of the agenda items. The resolution is in front of you, but more specifically, it's that the committee confirms the agenda for the meeting to be held today, that all of the items will be considered and open, with the exception of those items which are detailed in your papers, which will be dealt with in public excluded. And the final part of the resolution is that all reports be received. I move that resolution. Can I have a seconder? I think that's Councillor Sedgwick. Thank you, Councillor. That's great. Any discussion in relation to that? Councillor Church.
Yes, just a question on that, on the agenda. The 7.2 updated future plan works had an attachment as part of the agenda, but I don't seem to have it on page 292.
Good catch, Councillor Church. Does any one of the officers have anything to say on that?
No.
I will just have a look. Yeah.
Councillor Church, I think you win the chocolate fish for this morning. Congratulations. You always expect good officers to hide something. So it's obviously the paper that's been hidden today. Well done. So we'll see if we can pull that together, and thank you, Councillor Church, for pointing that out. Now, if we'll see if we can deal with that. Second item is in relation to disclosures of interest. In that regard, I think it's already in my disclosure of interest, but I'll just note the fact that there are a few references to the Waikato Local Authority Shared Services Company. I chair that company, so I'm just making that clear for the purposes of this meeting. Do any other of my colleagues have any disclosures of interest that they want to raise? Councillor Church, your hand is up. Is that a question?
No, I'd just like to conflict of interest. I won't be discussing it if it comes up, the Wellbeing Trust, in terms of the annual report.
Thank you, Councillor. That's great. Okay, nothing else. So let's turn now to the confirmation of minutes. The resolution here is that the minutes for the last meeting that you held on the 8th of June 2021, chaired by my predecessor, Margaret Devlin, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder on that before we move to discussion? Thank you, Councillor Sedgwick. Any discussion in relation to those minutes? Councillor Sedgwick.
I'm sorry, I can't find my emoji in my new reading.
No problem, I can see you clearly, thank you.
It's got present as Councillor Smith, but Councillor Smith is not actually a member of the committee, so he should just be shown as attending.
Thank you, Councillor. Forgive me, Galen, but do I appropriately turn to you to ask you to get that fixed?
So the resolution will just be altered a little bit with the following amendment to move Councillor Smith to attending.
Okay, thank you. Yep. With that change, is all my colleagues otherwise happy? Great, excellent, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Church, I beg your pardon.
At the bottom of page 15, just the dog pound continues to cause concern. I just wonder if, I don't recall it being in the actions register. So just a point on that for going forward.
Okay, just in terms of the action register, do you want to pick that up? Tony, are you comfortable to pick that up when we get to the action register, which I think is next?
Yep, sure.
Wonderful, thanks, Councillor Church. Again, and I have to say that in addition to the difficulties associated with chairing the Zoom meeting, all of the pictures keep moving around. So it makes it even more difficult to try and track where my colleagues are. Okay, let's turn now to the reports. The first report is the Audit and Risk Committee Action Register for September. We'll take that report as being read. The proposal is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the action register for September. Before we get into a discussion, do I have a seconder for that? Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Okay. Tony, did you want to speak to the additional item that Councillor Church raised?
So I might, through you, Mr. Chairman, ask Sue, see whether she would.
Wonderful. Thank
respond.
you. Hi, Sue.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Yes, it wasn't an action, but what I can undertake to do is, as part of the next report or out of cycle of the reports, we can send you a little bit of an update. We've got a series of actions that are taking place for the pound. So we can give you an interim update if that is what you wish. We can put that into the action register And if you require a fuller report, we could present that at the next Audit and Risk Committee.
Councillor Church, are you happy for maybe that to become just a short note out of cycle? Is that okay with you? Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Sue.
All right.
All right, so we're otherwise happy with the notes on the action register. Any of my colleagues have any questions that they want to raise? Otherwise, I'll take that as having been carried. Good, great, thank you. Tony.
So, Mr. Chairman, just if it's okay with you, so anything that now is completed, we'll remove from the register.
Thank you. Yep, excellent. Okay, folks, let's move on to the highlight of every meeting, which is the Chief Financial Officer's report. So the proposal here is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the updates from the Chief Financial Officer. I move that. Just before we get into discussion, could someone second that for us? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Alison, I've given you a big build up. Is there anything that you want to add before we move to questions?
So through you, Mr. Chair, oh, it's changed, Mr. Chair. Just an update on that Three Waters reform piece of the report. So some of you may be aware of a website that has been pulled together by some of our neighbouring elected members. So at a council not too far to the south of us. I just wanted to, I guess, provide some caution around the factual nature of what is purported on that website. So as you will be aware as councillors, we are not voting whether or not we are in the reform for the end of September. We are simply providing feedback on the information that has been provided to date from the DIA and the government to give them our thoughts on what's out there at the moment. There is a second stage to this process that will then trigger further discussion. So, and there are some inaccuracies there in terms of the Westland results for their water rates impact. Given the dashboard data, their rates actually reduces. So just to let you know that this information is out there. From my perspective, it's not factually correct. A large majority of what is on that page is not factually correct. There are some things that are, but it feels very positional. Happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you, Alison. Do any of my colleagues have questions on the CFO's report? Councillor Sedgwick.
I'm sorry, I still can't find my hand. Alison, are there, on your report, are there any other issues that you've considered and then disregarded for any reason? And secondly, are there any trends that you're following that may become a risk in the future? And where my second question has come from is something like a mass decision not to pay rates or something similar. So is there anything you've considered and disregarded? And are there any trends you're following?
Right, so through you, Chair. So when I looked at the report, I was thinking about including something around resourcing and some of the pressures that we're coming up against at the moment. I made a decision to not talk about this in this report due to the COVID lockdown and alert levels shifting and us really needing to get up to date with what it is we will be able to achieve in the next year and what that looks like from a resourcing perspective. But that is something that just need to be aware of if we want to maintain the same speed, yet we're losing traction given lockdowns, etc., that there's a potential discussion around resourcing to move us forward more quickly. The other question, so in terms of the mass rates,
or trend, as a trend or issue, for example.
Yeah, so we have been receiving a lot of good sector advice from the COVID resurgence group that's sort of been set up. So we have a lot of information through that, and we do know that a number of councils are, for example, delaying their penalty runs. So that's something that we will also be doing, yet not necessarily advertising. So It's for people who are really in dire straits. We really need to encourage people to pay where they can pay, but equally we need to be mindful of we are in a unique situation where we have split alert levels in our district. But any other council that I'm aware of. So,
okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Church.
Thank you, through the chair. So Alison, you put it in the first paragraph under the COVID considerations around that reduction in revenue may lead to reduction in revenue. You really, that was my question on the second page around rates revenue changes. Have we actually got that trend? And it really segues from Councillor Sedgwick's conversation. Are we seeing any changes in the revenue trend?
So through
the receipts that you anticipate or are happening?
Yeah, so through you, the chair. So our first rates instalment is due in 4 days' time on the 20th of September. So we have had revenue coming through, and there's nothing that signals at this point in time that we'll have an issue. But perhaps if I could ask Colin if he has any further update on that.
Thanks, Alison. We monitor the receipts every day, and they are on trend for a normal year compared to previous years as well. So we're not seeing anything yet, but we are receiving a good number of calls from individual ratepayers through to the rates team and our credit control team, asking about why they have to pay their instalment and why they have to pay the penalties if they can't get into the office. That's alluding back to Alison's comments about giving people more time to pay and dates when we are not going to penalise, when we're going to delay penalty runs too. But in terms of cash flow, it's holding up really well at this stage, and it's not giving me any cause of concern.
So we have also been providing advice to customers who have an objection against the valuation. We have been providing them with the advice that they should be making that first instalment. So this is predates the COVID situation, but we have said to them that they should be paying the rates, and then once the evaluation is resolved, then the adjustments will be made. So we've made it quite clear that otherwise they're at risk of having penalties applied.
Thanks, Councillor Church. Any other questions before we move to accept that resolution? I think we're all good. Yep, excellent. Thank you. All right, turning now to the next item, which is the Strategic Risk Register and Emerging Risks. And the resolution here is that the committee notes the strategic and emerging risks outlined in the attached register. Could I have someone to second that, please? I move it. Thank you, Councillor Gibb. All right, now I assume that Kutch is not with us. Is that right, Tony?
That's right, Mr. Chair. So Kutch is still on sick leave, but Glenn Mason is here to offer any observations in addition to the report. Glenn, I'm not sure whether you have anything you wanted to share.
No, Tony, not really. Just, I assume the report is taken as read.
Correct.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So really just to say that we are still working through, as the report highlights, some of the strategic risks in terms of the review.
Thanks, Glenn. I've got a question on this, but ahead of me are Councillor Sedgwick and Church. Councillor Sedgwick first, maybe.
Sorry, thank you very much. When I look at this report, and I'm very, very grateful to see the emerging risks specified at the front, what I find is that in reading through it, it becomes incredibly time-consuming and tedious. And I know it's really important. It's our engine, if you like. But what I'd like to know is, first up, I always want to know, are there any changes, or do we have to look through this to find out if there's changes? Could we perhaps have a heat map that showed us where we need to keep our attention, and if the rest of it is just running as normal, can it be an attachment for information? But highlighting, I don't want to miss anything, but I want to make sure that what's important is highlighted.
It's a very good point. Clint, did you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I think that's it's a good point, and we can take that away, Councillor Sedgwick, and just look at how we incorporate something like that. We're all up for improvement in how we present these reports.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, great suggestion. Councillor Church, was that your question as well?
No, through you, Chair. Just the unaffordability risk on page 45. So thank you for the information. My recollection of that conversation around affordability is much to do with that's around a financial perspective from council. At the time, my recollection of the affordability was also the issue around how can council maintain the services to its ratepayers around the issues of their affordability. So it's more around the cost of council services and affordability to ratepayers. And I guess this is highlighted at the moment with our 3 waters. So although we've taken the affordability from a financial perspective of council, I really don't see the other flip side of that as to how we provide levels of service or what those levels of service can be to segue the affordability for what we're supposed to be doing.
Glyn, did you want to talk to that?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I think Alison might like to.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Alison.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So council will recall that we did a deep dive on the affordability risk that came about through the workshop with KPMG in December last year. So this was the wording that was provided as an outcome of that workshop. So this risk relates directly to that. So Councillor Church, I take your point in terms of the risk around affordability and is multifaceted, but this was specifically to do with the outcome of that workshop and the deep dive report that you received last quarter.
Yeah, so I'm aware of that. I guess I'm just highlighting that. It may not be the right place, but I'm just, I think it has a risk factors in terms of what we do and how we do it and how we make decisions for our customers based on those affordability criteria from their perspective, not just from internal. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Mr. Deputy Mayor, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Just noting with, not sure of concern or not, but just some of those in the emerging risks tables that follow, page 38, page 41, for example, we've got ones that have just expired in terms of when they were meant to be or were due to be reviewed. And I guess with COVID, et cetera, that's probably fine. But I'm just conscious that there's then a number that rolls through in December, and even more, there's like a bow wave in February of 22. So just perhaps some staff commentary around how that those timelines are being hoping to be pulled back or met. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Anyone want to talk to that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think if you're referring Councillor Beck to some around the zero harm in particular, maybe when Lynn comes on board, we could get her to comment on that.
There's a range, Tony, if I can refer you to, right now I've got page 47 in front of me, that's on cybersecurity, it's got Alison's name on it, it's 1 December. So that's just around the corner, but there's others on page 38, page 41, 43. There's a whole range of people and different things, not just zero harm in terms of this residual inherent risk section.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, we'll perhaps take that away. Might just be a matter of sort of sequencing of this report. But my understanding is that the risk mitigations are up to date. So we need to get that an updated report for you.
Thank you.
So I just had one question, and it may be for Glyn. Can I just get this clear, Glyn, in relation to table 1, in relation to zero harm? The risk is said to be that significant harm is caused to workers. Significant harm. the rating, the inherent rating is extreme. The residual rating, notwithstanding, I assume, mitigations, is extreme, and the risk appetite is low. That's correct. That we don't think there's anything that we can do to bridge the delta between the residual rating and the risk appetite.
Tony, would you like to answer that? I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the assessment as of now, Mr. Chair. So there's a very extensive zero harm plan and program in place that's intended then to mitigate and bring the residual further down towards risk appetite. But as of now, and Gavin might want to talk to this, but because we have talked about this at previous meetings, where there's a sense that until we have a number of the outcomes that we're looking for as delivered in the plan, that we're taking a view that we can't reduce the residual rating.
Okay. No, okay. If that's the view, I'll look with interest to see that coming down, because I would have thought that that should have been accompanied with a figurative siren and flashing lights, because that's a major problem if that's what we think. Okay. Let's turn now to confirming that report is received. I think everyone's comfortable with that. No questions. Good. Thank you. Turning now to, I think, what is an extended part of the last time's risk conversation on building quality. You've received the report. The resolution here is that the committee notes the progress made on mitigation of risk in the building quality area. So I'll move that. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Sedgwick. Any discussion or questions on that? Merv, I beg your pardon, it's Merv?
Yes, good morning, Mr.
Merv, good morning.
Yes, it is Merv.
Merv, is there anything that you wanted to particularly add to the report before we move to colleagues' questions?
So I'd just make 2 points, if I may, Mr. Chair. And the first one is that all the non-compliances and serious non-compliances have been cleared.
Wonderful.
And we're working very strongly towards making sure they don't reoccur. The second point I'd make is that recruitment is still underway, and so we are struggling in the market at the moment to fill a couple of roles, but we are going back out to the market again this week to see what we can do.
Just before my colleagues ask a question, Merv, can I just ask, I think there was a reference at some point to the possibility of secondments via other councils. Is that something that you've been able to pursue, or are they equally under the pump?
They're all under the pump, Mr. Chair. So we've canvassed extensively across the country as well. I've rung as far south as Invercargill to see if anyone can help us. And pretty much every council in the country is experiencing similar workloads.
Okay. Do any of my colleagues have any questions on the report? Okay. Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you, Merv. I was just going to come back to in terms of are there any areas in which we are get into trouble legislatively in terms of not having discharged our obligations? I'm thinking about pools, for example. You talked about pool compliance. We actually had a time frame by which we have to make it around all the pools in the district, etc., etc. Yep. We're already sort of behind the pump on that one anyway.
Yes.
Is there anywhere there where there are actually a risk to council in effect? One of being legislatively in breach, and I guess reputationally, if there were to be some accident and it turns out we hadn't actually done our bit, perhaps we're late by many months or even years. Any thought or commentary around that?
So there is a risk, yes, there's no getting around that. However, the legislation is very clear around the owner's responsibility to ensure that that pool is fenced correctly. All we're doing is carrying out an audit function, councillor. We would end up in the loop eventually. But having said that, we've just engaged two roles to specifically inspect pool fences. And with the shortage of materials that currently exists in New Zealand, I'm turning some of my building inspectors that are perhaps a little bit quiet just at the moment because, well, of two reasons. One, the lack of materials, and two, we can't get into Pokino or Tuakau. So we're turning them to inspecting pools as well. But we expect the pool inspectors to be back online, and we're going to move towards trying to remedy that backlog of inspections.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is around that the burnout of the existing team. You know, this has been, to me, it seems to be a systemic problem. We know the issues, I understand that. It's not an easy fix. So I guess my question is for the whole of the ELT as to what wraparound services, knowing that this is a team that seems to be extraordinarily under pressure with lack of resources in this growth, you know, what added things have been, how have they been supported in terms of their well-being?
Thank you, Councillor. Who would like to answer that question? Sue.
Okay, so obviously the first call is to try and get as many resources on board as we can. So we've been actively supporting the recruitment process. I know Merv and the team have also been actively out there looking for consultancy support where they can. Well, I guess what we're doing as an ELT, we are consciously accepting that the timeframes are not being met. Okay, so sometimes it's happening in our resource consents world as well, where the teams are very, very professional, have huge integrity, and are really quite distraught by the fact that they're not meeting legislative timeframes and things. So we are supporting them in a way which is they can only do what they can do. This is not just a Waikato District Council issue. It's a national issue for a large number of councils. Obviously, over COVID, we've had in place our support where we have the team leaders and the people leaders are constantly in touch with their teams. We've sent surveys out to ascertain where people, particularly around COVID, but it is the workload is assessed in these things as well, to ascertain where we've got some hotspots of people who really aren't coping. We've had a number of people that we've actually, not necessarily in the building area, but we are promoting them even though the workloads are high, we're very much promoting them taking some time off, some leave, just taking a bit of space. So we're trying to do as much as we can, but ultimately it's trying to keep on top of where those hot points or where those areas are, or individuals who are suffering a little bit more than others. I guess it's pastoral care. We're putting quite a lot of intensity into that around the organisation as a whole, but particularly in those high workload areas, and building aren't alone in that there are a number of areas like that.
Thank you, Sue. Gavin, did you have an additional point you wanted to add?
Yes, I did. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I meet with the building inspectors, I probably every couple of months, just to check in on progress with them. And last time I met, we had, Merv was there, we had a very constructive conversation. And at that stage, they were feeling that they were on top of the workloads. So that I probably guess that's one thing. Also, every now and then, we have a meeting with Merv and his team leaders as well to talk about progress and to understand whether there is more that we can be trying to do as well. So we're certainly trying to wrap support around not only this team, but other teams within the organisation as well.
Thank you, Gavin. Merv, this is a question for you, and I recognise it's a difficult question, but the reality is this is an oversight question. This is an oversight committee. Do you think your team feels as supported as they can be, given the circumstances, by their colleagues and the council generally?
Yeah, I think so. And as far as what can be done, obviously, getting some more staff in would help immeasurably. That's just a symptom of the times at the moment, though, is finding staff, Mr. Chair. So yes, I think so. Generally, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Church's question is a really good one. I think everyone in governance roles these days is incredibly alive and sensitive to the issue of well-being. Very, very important. Okay.
Peter, if I might just quickly, Terence is my team leader for processing. Did you have anything to say on that, Terence, in terms of support for the team?
Thanks, Terence. Welcome.
Thank you. No, I think you've covered it there, Merv. I think the turnaround to get the support was a bit slower than we would have liked, but I think we've gotten to a place now where the support is there, and we're working towards getting the right amount of resources, so that's very helpful.
Good. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Merv. Colleagues, any further questions before we carry the motion? Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. Turning now to the next item, which is a deep dive report on growth. Welcome, Vishal. I thought that was a really good report. Thank you. Very interesting. So the resolution here is in 3 parts. First, that the existing risk be changed to read that the council experiences significant business, financial and community disruption as a result of population and household growth not occurring in line with forecasts. Second part, that the current risk treatments be removed and replaced with the new risk treatments outlined in the report. And thirdly, the third part, the inherent and residual risk likelihood and consequence be updated as outlined in this report. So those are the 3 parts of the resolution. I'll move the resolution. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Gibb, thank you. Okay, so any discussion or questions of Vishal?
Yeah, before you open for questions, can I just provide an update? So the report refers to the University of Waikato 2021 high growth projection to be considered by the Strategy and Finance Committee. That took place on the 6th of September, last Monday. So that recommendation is now going to council on Monday, the coming Monday.
Excellent. Thank you for that additional note. Any of my colleagues have any questions that they wanted to ask? Councillor Gibb.
Yes, more of an emphasis really. So we note in this report, along with when we spoke with Dr. Hong on a recent workshop, the team will continue to work on monitoring of the development capacity and actual dwellings consented. And I think that's really important because we know that there's a huge growth in many of our towns within this district. And I think that checking or ground truthing the University of Waikato's trends is more important because we know on the ground things that they wouldn't have known. Because it's all supposition, or perhaps not so much supposition, but their assessment as opposed to reality. So I just want to emphasise, in my mind, that's really important, Vishal. So thanks for that.
Noted. Yeah. And also, just to add to that, we need to do that on a sub-regional basis across territorial boundaries, because the nature of growth is such that political boundaries, becomes irrelevant. But absolutely, that's a key point that's been noted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vishal. But just before I get to Councillor Begg, just want to re-emphasise the point that Councillor Gibb made. It's absolutely critical. One of the great things about local government and elected representatives is the closeness they have to their individual communities. And so no one should have a better understanding about growth and potential than elected representatives. So thank you for taking on that point. Just in relation to sub-regional or regional considerations, to what extent are you communicating with your colleagues, Vishal, in other councils across the region in terms of aggregating information to provide you with better insights about growth prospects for the future, noting your point about the fact that you can't treat Waikato District Council as a bubble?
Sure. So within the Future-Proof Growth Strategy Partnership Chairperson, there is a particular work stream looking at forecasting and monitoring. So that work stream will be responsible for having oversight at the sub-regional level of growth as relates to residential and also business growth. So Maggie Hong, Dr. Maggie Hong is on the call as well. So she'll be, and together with Will Gauntlet, the the manager for the growth and analytics team, will be involved in that work. So that's part of us being involved in that discussion and that monitoring process, but also having a handle of what's happening in our district to inform that sub-regional perspective.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you. Michelle, on page 70, just after the what Councillor Gibb referred to there, there's an inherent risk score assessment prior to deep dive and post deep dive. I guess I'm just interested in a little bit of commentary around that, because it's quite a dramatic reduction, I suppose, in risk consequence. And I sort of put that up against what our experiences have been, in particular where we've had issues or been under pressure to deliver infrastructure for growth, hard infrastructure, along with the comments that Audit New Zealand made later in the report around their concerns. Just a note to the report, still an unmodified opinion, of course. Thank you, Clarence. But there is a note there about their concern, or noting a risk for us around the ability to deliver the capital projects that we intend, which seems to relate very much to this point. So I guess I'm just, given the size of the projects, to reduce the risk consequence to a financial exposure of less than $500,000, which is kind of a rounding error in some of these infrastructure projects. I guess I'm just wanting a bit more commentary around that. It seems an aggressive reduction.
Yeah, through you, Chairperson. I'm going to bring Will Gauntlet and Dr. Maggie Hong in on this, but just bear in mind this particular risk relates to population household growth not occurring in line with forecasts. But absolutely, if that growth gets out of hand and we are unable to provide the infrastructure to support it, it becomes an issue. And hence the point made by Councillor Gibb about being able to monitor and be able to front foot it and be proactive about how we're going to support that growth. But Will and Maggie, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, we sure can. So, for you, Mr. Chair, I just reiterate that distinction that Vishal's made, that council failing to provide infrastructure due to an ability to afford it or coordinate it, or as such, is separate from this risk, which is to do with forecasts not happening as in reality as they were forecast. So it's not so much about us not keeping up with growth, it's about something changing in the information that we use to plan our decisions. The reason it's such a substantial reduction is due to what we've termed in there is the lens through which we've considered that consequence. So I think, and this is working on some assumptions of whoever originally outlined that consequence, but looked at the catastrophic category, because the decisions that are made, the infrastructure investment, the wastewater pump stations and the treatment plant upgrades and things are easily in excess of $1.5 million in any one year. But the decisions made on the forecasting don't mean that whole pump station, the $10 million is the consequence. The consequence is more of an issue in time. So if the population hasn't come as soon or comes sooner, it's about moving that money in time. So the consequence is more around a consideration of interest or bringing things forward or delaying investment.
Thank you, Will. Dr. Hong, welcome. Anything you wanted to add?
So I might just add a few points. So really the difference we are considering here, the consequence is merely the delaying of the infrastructure planning. So if you think about, and the costs generally are the interest cost, and say if a pump station will cost $10 million, currently our interest rate is sitting around less than 5%. So we'll be only considering 5% of that $10 million, which will be less than the what's indicated in the report. So really, is what we are here correcting is a inaccurate estimation of the potential risk. we won't be able to deal with the other shortfall in terms of infrastructure, which should sit with other risks within within this area.
So, Mr. Chair, I accept that I may be drawing perhaps too long a bow, and I'm happy to go with the wisdom of the committee. I guess my observation would be that we are not very agile. We're not very able to very quickly pivot in terms of hard infrastructure, and our work plans will be based on growth figures. If we turn out, for example, with Pocono, that things go much faster than expected, there's a much more serious implication than just having to interest fund something. We just can't get the people, we can't get the material, we can't get the workers to actually do the job. That was kind of my point, but if that's too long a bow to draw, then I'll retire gracefully.
Thanks, Councillor Beck. Councillor Church.
Thank you, through the chair. I feel like Councillor Gibb and Councillor Beck and I are all on a similar wavelength and what we're doing and what we're saying, but slightly different ways. I understand the analytics, I understand why you want to change them down, but I think my interpretation of this is that we're actually talking about the consequences of growth for our reputation and for the consequences of non-delivery and also the outstripping. So whether this growth issue is split between the analytics, therefore lowering the risk because you've got better information coming through and the right people in place, I understand. But so I guess some of the words I've used to try and help to unpick what I feel that we're all touching on is, if we, as an example, if this council had a marketing perspective and a lens that was focused on the customer, an example would be, where is our relationships with developers to input information into what's coming potentially in the future? So I understand population, I understand household growth, understand consents, but that's all very current stuff. It is not projection orientated to future forecasting based on a marketing model. That's number one point. And I guess it's the other part is that, to explain it a bit further, is when you're talking about, as Councillor Beck said, around that inherent risk profile, I picked up that other part of it where the consequences of having an inflexible model where we're just taking one part of, say, interest, Dr. Hong, and I know you didn't mean it just as an example, but interest, but actually the consequences, and Pocono would be an example of late delivery of infrastructure, the consequences to our organisation, the risks, etc., is not just around the financial. So the silo of the model that we're using in our risk analysis and situation, I feel, needs a bit more conversation. So I feel actually we're siloing things like growth and risk and reputational things, and even health and safety, into too many silos of risk rather than the interconnectivity of them. And I don't see that within the report. And I don't see anywhere where you're analysing past history, great, but who is analysing the potential future and who is dealing with these big shakers and movers to actually impact? And I don't see that in the report, Vishal, to actually say what's being added to that, to those analytics. If that helps.
Yeah, look, I think the supply chain issues which Councillor Beck alluded to, and the risk of us being unable to meet or provide infrastructure to meet growth demands as a result of issues we don't have control over, can be captured. I think I can't remember the exact wording, but there is a risk in the risk register related to infrastructure, and we'll probably just need to revisit that, Tony, together with Roger, just to look at whether the supply chain issues and the ability of council to deliver in accordance with our plans and strategies, match up.
Councillor Beck, Councillor Church, I wonder whether we might just leave this with the team to go away and reflect on and consider whether they feel on balance the need to change the assessment, which is really the questioning that you folks are undertaking, or whether they'd like to keep it, and if so, why. I'm happy for that to be, Vishal, a short note between meetings, if that's easier. If Councillor Beck and Councillor Church are happy to leave it on the fact that you've made the point, you've raised the issue, let's get the team to have go away and have a think about the issue and then report back if that's okay with you both. Is that okay? Cool. Thank you very much.
I do have another question, just as
of course.
In terms of the through you, Chair, just in terms of the resolution, because I was thinking of how I would change, put an amendment to this resolution, or we just take this, there's another part of this growth, let's call it that we want to have a bit more in-depth understanding of, because I think if we're passing this resolution as it stands, we're not covering off what we've been talking about clearly.
I think potentially as one resolution is to re-raise this risk in some other issues or emphasize in some other issues, because as the risk statement currently stands, what you're talking about is not a consequence. So yeah, we need to revisit that somewhere else, really. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
Okay, so if we take it that Councillor Church, are you happy if we pass a resolution, but it's on the basis that we've already asked Vishal and his team to come back? You comfortable with that? Because the bottom line is we're not going to lose this issue. Okay, cool. That's wonderful. So on that basis, we'll pass the resolution. Vishal and team, thank you for your efforts, and we look forward to your reconsideration of that point that Councillors Beck and Church made. Shall we turn now to the tax risk management update, and the resolution which I move is that the committee notes the tax risk management update. Could I have someone to second that? Thank you, Councillor Church. Who is going to speak to that? Oh, good morning.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got no other comments other than just to assure the committee that the events that occurred which caused the self-declaration of the error in the GST payment have been taken to heart, and we have now put in place a process to make sure that doesn't happen again, including peer reviews of the spreadsheet and the data that goes to pay the GST.
Thank you.
That was the only update I have.
Thank you, Colin. From memory, that GST amount was about 311,000. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Colin. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Great. Okay. So on that basis, we'll carry that resolution. Thank you, Colin. Turning now to the next item, which is the zero harm update. The resolution is that the committee notes the zero harm update. I'll move that resolution. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Sedgwick. So who will be speaking to zero harm?
That's me.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so unless there's anything particularly burning you want to say, in which case you're more than welcome to say it, we'll move to questions. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I was just going to say that the last 3 months have been pretty full on. I guess key points to note is that we completed our end of year performance review, which has then led to our new zero harm strategic plan for this financial year. We've obviously made a couple of changes to activities which previously the committee has shown interest in, which is the zero harm engagement conversation. So we launched a new process in August, and obviously look forward to being able to better analyse the data that's coming out of that. And I guess the other big achievements is we're currently 60% delivered on our workplace violence, situational safety and tactical communications training. We've got another 4 courses before we've successfully trained 168 people in the org.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sedgwick, you've got a question. I've got a question as well. So Councillor Sedgwick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lynn. Your reports are always good to read. What's keeping you awake at night, and what would be the magic wand that would fix your concerns?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the thing that always keeps me awake at night is the management of our critical risks. And just making sure that we implement with haste the controls that we've identified for those critical risks, and then that we've got robust assurance processes in place to make sure that once we implement the controls, they remain in place. So I'm sure the committee's no doubt aware that, you know, that's been a key focus of our strategic plan is management of critical risk, and it did take a hit in the last 12 months in terms of, you know, COVID impacting our focus in that area. And we did do some reprioritization of work following the dog bite incident that occurred to our animal control officer. So we do have a very ambitious plan this year to turn on another 3 critical risks, so mental well-being, working on or near roadways, and work-related, so working with firearms. And I guess probably the biggest challenge in that critical risk space that not so much keeps me awake at night, but probably from a technical point of view is the most trickiest to deal with would be mental well-being. And so I think, yeah, that's probably the risk that's going to involve, you know, the most thought in terms of like how we approach it. And it's probably the risk that's going to impact just about everybody in this organisation. Some of the risks that we deal with are quite discrete. So like obviously working with firearms is very much associated with animal control, but this is a risk that's going to touch the entire org.
Thanks, Lynn. Great question, Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor, I beg your pardon, was there a follow-up?
Yeah, well, it really was. I assume it is, the question is, as always, resourcing. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. Always a good report. I was really taken with the safety culture and leadership standard piece, which is obviously is then moving beyond the, you know, the clipboard, investigating where something's gone wrong and really trying to, you know, put that ambulance at the top of the cliff, or even better, a fence a bit back from the edge of the cliff. So yes, I agree with you. The whole well-being piece is going to be really important. And I turn my mind in particular to this hybrid model that we now work with post-COVID, with more and more time at home or in different workplaces, and how that might impact on our ability to sort of see, detect, support, wrap around our employees. So that's my first point. And my second point, whether you've started to give thought to people who in that hybrid model then for the at work bits find themselves perhaps at a work site or somewhere different, you know, at a workplace different to an office. So they're not at home, they're not at an office, but because they're not used to being in that culture of being in the office and popping out to a work site, I don't know, does that make for different risks, you know, the fact that you've had to get out of your sweatpants to to go to a work site as opposed to coming from the office?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think you raised some really good points, Councillor Beck, and, you know, obviously that's one of the things that COVID, you know, and one of the, you know, benefits that COVID, I guess, has created is this whole flexible working and looking at work being completed in different places or where the work's best performed. But as you are quite rightly pointing out, it does create risk, which needs to be managed. So like, you know, we need to take all reasonably practicable steps that you are safe while you're working for us from home as far as reasonably practicable, but also like, how do you, yeah, it's created challenges like, you know, how do you provide advice and support and give people the tools to assess the environment where they're working and make it safe. So we're moving to much more of a dynamic risk assessment model as opposed to like a very static model where we have complete control over the situation. And so I think the approach that we need to focus on is about giving our people the right tools to be able to identify the situation and implement the correct controls.
That's a good point. Well made. Thank you, Lynn. Councillor Beck, okay?
I was just going to say, yeah, and that's where culture leads.
Absolutely.
And sorry, I was just going to, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, just say, I think that, that's where I've enjoyed working with Kat from a risk point of view as well. Our focus is very much now around giving our people the ability to assess and understand risk and giving them the tools to manage risk. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed a lot of the work that we've been doing from a risk management point of view. We've been aligning with the work that Kat has been doing. So we're singing off the same hymn sheet.
That's great to hear, Lynn. I just had one question. Where do I find trend analysis for the Zero Harm program? I see a lot of data points. Where do I find the trends?
That's a really good point.
So, and the reason you don't need to answer this now, maybe that's something you could reflect on and come back. But from my perspective, I'm looking at what I'd categorize as a nuclear alert in relation to Zero Harm, where there's a difference between a significant delta between post-mitigation risk currently and risk appetite. And so what I'm looking for is to see a trend downwards in terms of the activation of mitigations across the critical areas of risk. So I'd really appreciate it if perhaps you could give some thought to how we might map those trends, not in any way to take away from the data points that you're collecting, but considering we have a figurative nuclear alert in relation to Zero Harm, I think it would be helpful for the committee to receive some assurance that all the mitigations that we are applying are having impact and that we are moving downwards across all of the areas that you judge to be critical risks.
Yeah.
Can I leave that with you to reflect on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Anyone else have any questions on that before we carry that resolution? All good? Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item is the proposed revision of the Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference. Colleagues and I have already undertaken a workshop in relation to that, and as a result of which I note that some amendments were made to the terms of reference to try and pull together the thoughts that were bounced around at the workshop. The resolution is that the committee recommend to the council that the council adopt the revised Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference. I'll move that resolution. Will anyone second that for us? Okay, thank you, Councillor Beck. Now, do any of my colleagues have any questions? Good. Everyone's happy? Okay. Thanks, Tony, to you, to Alison and to Katja for your efforts in pulling it together. So that is carried. Thank you. Let's turn now to the next item, which is the Information and Records Audit Management Report. And the resolution here is that the committee notes the Information and Records Management Audit Report recommendations as listed in the report. I'll move that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gibb. Colleagues, do any of you have any questions in relation to that report? Okay, that's great. So we'll take that as having been carried. The next item is in relation to Audit and Risk Committee key achievements. And the resolution here is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the progress made in several areas in the 2021 financial year and that activities undertaken met all requirements outlined in the Audit and Risk Committee's terms of reference. So I'll move that resolution. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Gibb. Councillor, can I also thank you for the report? Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Councillor Sedgwick.
feels a little bit like we're patting ourselves on the back, but actually I think what it is that staff have really stepped up, have done a great job, and have taken on board where appropriate any suggestions or improvements, and I'm enormously grateful and proud of where they've taken us. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor, for giving credit where it's due. Councillor Church.
Yes, thank you through, Mr. Chair. I guess my point is also the other side of that. I definitely agree with Councillor Sedgwick, is the opportunities of how we as a committee improve our performance. And I guess I'll go back to your point, Peter. I loved what you said around the health and safety as to where we are and where we're going in terms of, let's like a pie chart or a scale of where we so that we can track that over the year. I think in terms of our audit and risk, the same thing. And I actually noted that same point for something else further on the agenda, where we actually say where we were at the beginning of a year or X time and where we are now and where we're moving towards. That sort of scale on quite a few of our areas would be very helpful just as a visual. So again, it's the same thing. I guess I take the other side. How can we as an audit and risk committee do our job better? And like that self-analysis and self-reflection, I don't sort of see that part of it. So I see the journey. I think I'm really proud of what the staff have come back to, but from our point of view, and also feedback from staff and as well as to how we can do our job better.
Great points. Thanks, Councillor. Tony, did you want to speak to those points? Is that the reason your hand's up?
Yes, so just through you, Mr. Chair, so just noting those comments from Councillor Church are consistent with some comments that you made in the terms of reference review. And so we have sort of reflected something in the terms of reference now, which is around that continued maturity of the committee over time. So I think we will capture that in performance reporting going forward. It'd probably be good to have a think about how we measure that at some point. And just the other comment, Mr. Chair, is that this report now, one of the key purposes of this report is to keep the remainder of the councillors connected into the business of this committee. So this report will be shaped in a way that now will go to the council, probably actually connected some way to the terms of reference review.
Okay, thank you. Tony, Councillor Church, I totally agree with you in relation to continuous improvement. And indeed, it's really lies, that focus really lies at the heart of the twin themes that I'm really picking up from where you and Margaret started, which is really tighter focus, brevity, which allows time and space for the kind of overview, oversight that I think this committee really brings to the table. Otherwise, if you get lost in paperwork, you're not truly fulfilling the responsibilities of the committee as an oversight committee. So I think you've given a good challenge there. I'd like to reflect on that a little bit and maybe caucus with committee members from time to time to see if we can land something which will give us a series of benchmarks against which can evaluate our own performance as a committee. Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, so on that basis, then I think we're comfortable with the key achievements document, and that'll be accepted. Turning now to the annual report. This resolution's in two parts. That's subject to receiving final clearance from Audit New Zealand. The Audit and Risk Committee recommends to Council the adoption of the audit of the annual report as attached from a risk perspective, and that improvements to the annual report process be captured with progress on actions being reported to the March 22 Audit and Risk Committee meeting. That's the that is the proposal. That's the resolution. I move that. Can I have someone second that before we get into a discussion? Thank you, Councillor Beck. Okay, I would just simply add that in relation to the annual report, I did not read the financial statements. I don't believe that I am sufficiently qualified to be able to form a view as to whether the financial statements create any risk, and therefore I've deliberately not read them. All I've read is the commentary at the front. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, do any of my colleagues, sorry, Colin, how can I help?
May I make a few comments before
of course.
we open the floor? Thank you. Thanks for receiving the report. The annual report documents were attached for information only, and my apologies for not making that clear in the report. Our intent of the report is to focus on the areas of focus raised by Audit New Zealand at the beginning of the audit, and to bring the committee up to date on where we are with those issues and raise any issues or risks that we see with that. Going forward, we won't attach the annual report, draft annual report documents, because they are not the intent of the report. What we're seeking is Audit and Risk Committee's confirmation that they're happy with the risk issues, and we've dealt with the areas of focus adequately going forward, so we can take the annual report through to council and hopefully with Audit New Zealand's clearance, get it adopted in due time.
Thank you, Colin. I've got a couple of questions for you. I must say I thought that the commentary was a rollicking good read. So I actually enjoyed the opportunity to read and learn a little bit about the district. I do have some questions for you. Councillor Church, I know you've got a question.
Yes, through Mr. Chair. Yeah, I take you on board what you said, Peter, around the financial statements too. I mean, they're very complex, and I understand a bit of finances, but it's a lot. And I guess from that perspective, I was thinking it's not a risk really, it's more like a helpful transparency that at the beginning, that there's maybe just even a one paragraph, our business is doing okay, we're all good, and any of the 3 issues or things that we've identified and fixed. So that, and if you want more information, then go to the back to the blah, 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 blah. Because very few people will go through line by line, but I think just an overall summary, executive summary, I guess, of the finances, like that would be helpful, because all I want to know is we aren't concerned about anything. We looked at these things, we've moved on from this. We're looking at this next time to try to improve it, because not that it needs it, but we want to go along that performance. I think that would be really helpful as just a one-pager at the beginning of the financial statements.
It's a great suggestion. Thank you, Colin. Thanks, Councillor Church. Great suggestion. Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the additional insight into your personality, Mr. Chairman. Rollicking good read. There we go. We've learned something about your interest right there. Just a comment, Colin, on your impact of Three Waters section on page 117. I'm really just putting it on record that whilst you said what you've said, I'm sure is right, that we received a share of $761 million. Given the public interest in this and the daily emails that all elected members are getting, it might be useful to refer back to the Alison's previous paper, where I think it's 11.34 was our share. Just so that ratepayers don't get too excited about the $750 million that we received a share of. It's 11.34 million. That's all, just for the record.
Thanks,
Thank
Councillor.
you. If I may respond, that is clear in the annual report document itself. It does note the DIA contribution to our funding at that level.
Thanks, Colin. Colin, I've just got 4 quick questions. The first is, have the Downer New Zealand and the Cushman and Wakefield contracts been assessed for performance against the business case metrics? Presumably, when you entered into these contracts, there was a business case, there were metrics to judge success. Have the Downer NZ and Cushman and Wakefield contracts been assessed against those initial metrics?
Could I refer that question to Mr. McCulloch, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors. Look, ultimately, both those contracts are recently either rolled over or renewed, and in the renewals, the whole framework value for money proposition has been reviewed and embedded in the new contract. So it's very early on with both of those two. So I think the simple answer is no, and that's because we've got such new contracts, but there is the framework put in place so we can do it on a regular basis moving forward. Okay. And I don't raise that in any critical way, but largely to just reflect the fact that you would have undertaken a business case analysis for the purposes of determining that it was in the best interests of the district to move into these contracts. And it's just, I think, useful as a learning organisation to be able to document the fact that you've done a look back, and to the extent that there have been any material variations between what you thought was going to happen and what did happen, that we've learned from that. Not necessarily that anyone's being chastised or criticised, because things change, but it would be useful to know from you when you think that the time would be right to do that look back. Okay, so the Alliance one, actually the councillors in Gavin's KPIs performance review have asked for some information around sort of that same point. Is it delivering what we think it's delivering? And so the deadline for that is December. There is a lot of work that we're putting into explaining to, in particular, the chair of the infrastructure committee, what the rollover of that contract involved and how we are measuring success. So there's something we can provide on that one. In terms of the Cushman Wakefield, that one's a very new contract. Right. So I'd have to talk to the team in terms of when are we going to have enough information to demonstrate performance. I would suggest that one is at least 6 months, maybe even 12 months, because it's only in the last 6 months that we've entered into that one. It's absolutely fine. It's not that I need to know personally. It's just I want to be assured that the council will make that determination. And if that's through some other committee, that's absolutely fine. Councillor Sedgwick, I think you might have had a follow-up question before I get on to my second, third, and fourth questions for Colin.
You're quite right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I absolutely endorse that request and look forward to the response. It's a critical thing for us. Thank you. Thank you for raising.
Thanks, Councillor. Okay, Colin, the second question is, I see that there are some CapEx deficits. How are those funded?
CapEx deficits. Can you be more specific what you mean by CapEx deficits?
Not without going through multiple pages on my iPad.
All right. Okay.
From memory, in the commentary, there's reference to capital expenditure across the whole of council, and in some years, I think that the capital spent is greater than the capital expenditure spent is greater than the capital expenditure allocated. I'm assuming that the deficits are funded by debt, but that wasn't quite clear to me in the commentary.
That is correct. They are funded by debt. And recovered over time from revenues such as development contributions, etc., and development agreements.
Great, thanks, Colin. Third question, and here I was smart enough to at least take a page number. I see that business units are growing at less than the national average. Do you think that that's indicative of a wider risk for the district, which is that it is at risk of becoming effectively a dormitory district? I'm interested to understand why business units in a district that is growing so much, why business unit growth is below the national average. That worries me, and I'm just wondering whether I should be worried. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Just to clarify, when you say business units, you're talking about businesses and commercial enterprises throughout the district.
Yeah, you've got a metric there at page 138.
Yes. That is, I think, something I would refer to the growth team. And maybe if there's nobody online to answer that, we can take that question away and respond to you separately.
Thanks. Because the request was we look at the annual report from a risk perspective.
Yes.
And I am interested in a burgeoning building consent boom, but our business units are below the national average. So I'm interested to understand why that is the case. And then the fourth question, and this may be the stupid question of the day, but someone's got to ask it. Did the Waikato District Council only spend 1.7 cents out of every dollar on solid waste, stormwater, wastewater, and water?
No, that's not correct. I think that is...
that's quoted as being for every dollar of general rates.
Alison is best to respond to that one.
Alison.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the graphic that you're looking at is just depicting how the general rate is broken down. We charge for those services via targeted rates. So the aspect that is to do with the general rate is for funding those facilities on our own land, so public toilets, etc.
I thought you'd say that. Do you feel, in retrospect, that that might be a little bit misleading?
Probably. Let's get that updated for the next year.
Because it's not a true reflection of the way in which rates are spent, is it?
No, so that's just the general rate portion. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe another infometric might be of greater value next year in terms of giving ratepayers a better sense of how much you spend on water and wastewater. Because it looks like you spend 32% more on roads, which can't be right. 32 times more on roads, which can't be right. Councillor Church.
Yes, thank you for sharing. That's a really good point. If you're going to do that extra infometrics, it'll probably be helpful. Main will be the three waters, but we have other targeted rates that are district-wide. So I think that just to make sure whether that would confuse the issue or that gives a holistic overview of the whole revenue rating process.
Okay.
So the three,
thanks, Councillor Church.
You have to take that into account.
Okay. I promise to ask a lot easier questions, Colin, next time. Okay.
Happy to take any questions at all.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. All right. Colleagues, is everyone comfortable now to adopt that resolution? Good. Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Turning now to the final audit management report for the long-term plan, and the resolution here is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the final audit management report for the long-term plan 21-31. I'll move that. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gibb. Okay, is there anyone that wishes to speak to this before we move on to the questions from colleagues?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Melissa Russo, Corporate Planning Team Leader. I wrote the report, but I just wanted to note that the audit management report is quite self-explanatory, so I didn't have anything specific to add.
Absolutely fine. No problem at all. Thank you, Melissa. Do any of my colleagues have any questions for Melissa or any of the team? Okay. It looks like that's carried. Obviously, brilliantly written, Melissa. Well done. Okay, turning now to the next item, which is the Quality and Governance Assurance Update. The resolution is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the Quality and Assurance Update for September 2021. Do any of the officers want to talk to that, or should we just go straight to questions?
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's really just there for your information.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the resolution? Thanks, Councillor Beck. And so that is carried. Turning now to the updated future work plan. I know that that is from memory also there for information. The resolution is that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the updated future work plan. Can I have a seconder for that?
And so that, Mr. Chair, that's just the one that we need to get the actual copy of that work program for you, so we will circulate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Church, for reminding me.
That's absolutely fine. Now, Galen has distributed that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I can't because I'm a man, I can't do 3 things at once. So I'll get to look at that a little bit later. How do you want to deal with this, Galen?
Through the chair, well, it's really up to Tony, but I would think if councillors have got, or the committee have got any questions on it, that they forward them through to democracy, and we'll get the right people to answer them.
So sure, thank you, Galen. So on that basis, we should just table the resolution, but leave it on the table and not pass it because we've only just received the information. Is that the correct way to do this?
Yes.
Okay. On that basis, we'll simply table the resolution on the basis that the information has just been received, and to the extent that colleagues have any questions, they can come back to either to Galen or to the report writer if that's known. Okay. The next item before we get into exclusion of the public is, again, an item I assume that's been taken as read, which is that the committee notes the registers of interests. Can I have a seconder for that? Great, thank you, Councillor Church. Any questions on that before we carry the resolution? No, that's good. Okay. We're just about to move into exclusion of the public. The resolution is that the public be excluded in respect of the subjects that are listed in the papers for the reasons listed in the papers. And in particular also that Mr. Susan from Audit New Zealand be permitted to remain at the meeting after the public's been excluded because of his knowledge of audit requirements for the council, and that knowledge will be of assistance to the council. The resolution's in front of you. Can I have someone second that, please?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure. Katarina, are you staying for this portion as well?
I will be.
In that case, thanks, Galen. We should amend the resolution to include Katarina as well. Welcome, Katarina. On that slightly amended basis, are my colleagues happy to pass that resolution? Yep, good, thank you.